Hi, welcome to Hashtag Finance. I'm your host, Barrington Miller, and we are kicking off an extra special week this week called Weed Week. And what better person than Alan Brochstein with New Cannabis Venture and 420 Investor to reflect on the last few years and the current state of the world, the new unusual, the new norm, the temporary norm, the whatever you would like to call it. Alan, thank you for joining, and thank you for taking the time.
Great to be here.
How are you doing? How's the family?
I'm lucky. I'm in Houston, Texas. The city itself, obviously a large city, has some issues, but not like the more dense cities that we hear so much about. I work out of my home anyway, so it really hasn't been too much of a challenge for me, but wow, what a crazy world we live in. And I have a son in New York City. It scares the crap out of me. Yeah.
Is he okay?
Yeah. Oh, everybody's fine. Thank you.
Okay. Well, that's good. Well, the reason we're here and the reason we asked you, you've been all things. You've been a proponent of the industry. You have been a supporter. You have been an insider. You have been a critic. You have been everything. And we just didn't think it would be proper to have this week without talking to you and what you've seen from your vantage point over the last few years in the industry. And as we just really celebrated 420 in all over the world. So.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it was a weird 420. I appreciate those kind words, and kudos to you guys as well for really moving the industry forward by allowing it to access capital through public trading, which that's really been the first and most important thing in the last few years. The industry, when I came into it in 2013, it was a bunch of penny stocks. They weren't really cannabis companies, and now, and I know you'll be interviewing some of these companies. We have 4 U.S. CSE traded companies with $1 billion market cap or higher. And, obviously in Canada, there's 4 that are traded in Canada and then Tilray, so $5 billion Canadian LPs. And so the space has become much more real, Barrington. In the last few years, it's been disappointing and at the same time, just extraordinarily gratifying. And I say extraordinarily gratifying because of all the progress the industry has made, whether you want to look at revenue or any sort of metric, the number of patients and customers served, however you want to look at it, there's been a lot of progress. And it's been in very uncertain times, but not so great has been the stock prices. And I'm happy to talk about that, but I always say the road to legalization is filled with potholes, and we've run into a bunch. And I really thought, we had the last time investors plowed into the sector, there were kind of 2 things going on at the end of 2017 and into early 18, and one of them actually extended into later in the year. The first was California legalizing was a huge thing for getting investors interested. At the same time, that legalization was a disaster and has been a disaster. So that was early 18, and that drew a lot of investors in. And of course, in Canada, which went federally legal, that event itself of federal legalization actually transpiring turned out to be the top of the market. And you've been around a long time. That's unfortunately the way things work when you buy the rumor, sell the news. So really, this market has been under a lot of pressure over the last 18 months since Canada legalized, and that too, Barrington, has been a huge disappointment on many fronts. I think we talked about that last time. So here we are 18 months later. I think between the last time we spoke and now, we're now in our second crisis. The first one was very short-term in duration, but it really cut a wound open in the industry. There was already a wound, the inability to raise additional capital, and we can talk about that more, but that was a problem that became a larger problem when the vaping crisis hit. And then the pandemic has just ripped it open even more. And so blood is spewing everywhere. And we're really in it's a Darwinian situation, sadly. And some companies, they're going to be very challenged, but they'll survive. They have access to capital. And then others will go by the wayside.
For sure. And this, a lot of people have compared this with various other stages in economic life. We've talked about the dot-coms, and a lot of people may not remember, but Google and Facebook and all of those other major huge companies weren't around at the beginning of the dot-com. They emerged either during or after. And there was it's actually a trivia question. There's only one company that was around before and is still around now.
I think that's Amazon of the companies.
Well, nope, it's actually Priceline.
Oh yeah. And when did Amazon go public?
I think that was either during or after.
Okay.
So that just goes to show you, like, this industry, and so much has changed even from the last time we talked. And for our listeners and our viewers, we're going to jump all over the place here because I love talking.
I'm good
to Alan.
at that.
I love talking to Alan, and nothing is scripted. So
never for me.
No,
not good at scripts.
No, terrible. And I can't see without my glasses anyways. So yeah, let's talk about the ability to raise money and the ability to find capital. When we attended, when I attended the Las Vegas conference, everybody was just talking about debt financing. That was the only way. And the sweet phrase was 3 to 5 million. That's all we need, 3 to 5 million. And you go back a year and a half, 2 years ago, when it was 30 to 50 million. And that was no problem. Now what we're seeing, at least with some of the companies that we've spoken to during our outreach, is that business is actually booming for them, but they can't sustain it. They can't raise money. So they're doing $40,000, $50,000 a day. I mean, figures are Canadian, but now they can't raise money. They can't expand. They can't get workers because of, they're considered frontline workers. And of course they're worrying about their health and such. Before all of this happened, we were talking about 2020 being the year of the balance sheet. And now it's time to put up or shut up. It is time to grow. It's time to act like a real company. And then this hit.
Yep.
And it just exacerbated, I think, what was going to happen. And this is just my opinion. This was going to happen. Maybe not as violently, maybe not as quickly, but this was going to happen. There was going to be a culling of some sorts.
Yeah.
What do you think? Do you think this was going to be the way anyways?
I think what adds to it right now, I think one of my big criticisms of both mainly the Canadian companies, but to some extent the MSOs, has been this winner take all mentality, building an empire at any cost. And for the Canadian LPs, they had a lot of money thrown at them, and it was pretty easy to go spend it, right? And places all four corners of the world, basically. Well, the U.S. companies didn't have as much money thrown at them, first of all, and second, just the federal illegality and the complexity of building a business did constrain some of them. But we saw a lot of M&A, and some of these deals have not worked out very well, and some of them have been terminated before they closed and all that. But I think one of the paths out of this current situation before the pandemic hit was rationalization of the footprint. And in a healthy market where there's investors that want to put more money in, where companies have confidence, that'll work. But right now, it's really hard to envision. And listen to the Cresco call yesterday, and they
I was gonna ask you about that because
they walked away from a Florida deal previously. They just
was it like 30 million or
no? That was bigger, but they walked away from that one. And then they walked away from a $260 million Nevada, Arizona, Utah deal yesterday. They announced it. And so, they're doing kind of what needs to be done. And, companies are trying to they like to say this, and it's good that they're doing it. We have our core built, and if we do acquisitions, it's going to be in that core, not to expand it. And so, and it's probably going to work out well for the companies that have access to either debt or sale leasebacks, because that deal that Cresco walked away from in Florida, well, Ianthus or Harvest, if they have to, or MedMen, these are companies that may have to exit that market, and they have a license, But the point being, being patient, the survivors are going to be able to pick up assets, and they're not going to buy the bad assets, and the financial groups don't want to buy the bad assets. So I think it's going to be a really interesting time. And I do agree with you. We were headed towards a challenging period in any event. The pandemic has just really exponentially ramped up some of those challenges that many companies will face. And so when I look at the US space right now, I don't think it's greed as much as I would have said back then. It's necessity. It's very hard to raise equity capital right now. Although I would say of the big four in the United States, those being Cresco, Curaleaf, GTI, and Trulieve, I have warned my subscribers at 420 Investor, no, the world's not coming to an end tomorrow. You don't have to sell these stocks, but be aware of the financial risk these companies are taking by taking on debt, and some of it is short dated, and by doing these sale leasebacks, which are going to ramp up their costs and leave them with no assets in the future, or fewer assets. And so it's a balancing act, and investors need to appreciate that, yes, these are the companies that look to be poised to really benefit from everyone else's demise, or maybe there's some others in the wings. I know you guys must be talking to some of these companies about their plans to go public in the future. And I know some of these companies, and they have good finances, and because they didn't go public early and they've raised a lot of capital in the hopes of going public, and people were willing to fund those because they weren't public yet, they're in a good position. So I think those
cash is king, man.
Cash is king. And so the big four in the United States, I think, are really in a great position to benefit from reduced competition. And let's look at it objectively. These companies are scaling up much better than the Canadians. They're generating more revenue more quickly, and they are losing less money in the process. And they share their numbers, EBITDA positive on an adjusted basis. So let's give them a little credit. It's not perfect, but it's a lot better than what we saw in Canada. And now they're in a position to continue to scale, as well as to watch their competition either go away or to be bought by them for, literally pennies on the dollar. So I think between those four and some others that strike me as well positioned. So I don't want to say just four companies,
right?
A few others.
No, but we do talk about the big four, and we do refer to them, and we've discussed them being on Weed Week, all of them. Yeah. So I'm not going to tell you which ones agreed, or were able to with their schedule.
Yeah.
Hey, we got at least three.
There shouldn't be a schedule, right?
Well, there's different approaches to how companies interact. So,
yeah. I get it. I was kind of kidding.
Yeah. No, they're.
I have a schedule. It's all in my house, but I do have a schedule.
It's no, it's good. And when you talked about some of those companies, I know, and I'm pretty sure it's Trulieve, they're hiring, they're expanding.
Cresco just announced that they've hired a bunch. I'm not sure about GTI and Curaleaf, but this has been, and I hear this a lot, that the cannabis industry has just passed with flying colors a major test. It somehow has moved from a stigmatized industry that just some people care about to one that is delivering as an essential service provider, and truly delivering. I mean, it's not easy. Charlie at Cresco spoke yesterday about just how topsy-turvy it's been to go from having retail stores to all of a sudden, the customer has to order online and pick it up outside. And I would argue some of these things are going to make the industry better, because, there's a lot of reasons why the legal cannabis industry in certain states doesn't do very well compared to the illicit market. But I would argue one of the main ones is convenience. And, the illicit market knows how to please the customer. And I'm not blaming the cannabis companies, because it's the regulators in many cases that don't permit it. But in any event, it's a combination of that. And these companies, just, this is a little off topic, but I needed to talk to my doctor, and I wrote her a note, and so they wanted to do a visit. And I was like, oh, fine, I'll do a visit. I thought my note would accomplish what I wanted. Right. But we did the visit, and, this is somebody that's never done mine wasn't the first, but until recently, she had never done telehealth. And telehealth is awesome. For somebody like me who's busy and doesn't want to go out anyway, if they could only do the blood work online.
Right.
But kidding aside, this is going to make industry better by knowing how to do like other companies do, omni-channel retailing, and I think it's great.
So I was listening to a conference, must have been 3 or 4 weeks ago. Time has sort of shifted now. Everything's 3 to 4 weeks ago, maybe 5, and they were talking about some of the industries that were going to emerge out of this and the shift, and it's exactly that: hands-free, curbside, no touching, drop off, all of those things. And if there's companies that have proper distribution channels and distribution channel companies, and ones that offer those services, right now they are in extreme high demand.
Right.
And I don't think that's going to waver anytime soon. And I don't see that changing anytime soon.
And you guys have it a little easier up in Canada. And I know Fire and Flower has been very on the leading edge in terms of technology. But
yeah,
because it's federally legal, you guys can use credit cards. And it makes it so much easier, more streamlined than in the United States, where it's, hey, I will confess, I'm not going to tell everybody either because I don't want to get anybody in trouble, but yeah, I figured out a way to buy my half-sister in California for her birthday some edibles. And I had them delivered to her home from Texas. And I was very proud of myself for pulling this off. Not a publicly traded company, by the way. Actually, one of these nice ones sitting in the wings, I think. But it was just interesting. And they actually have partnered, this company has actually partnered with what I think is a compliant end around solution. The way I did it was a little gray, I would say. But hopefully, like, I'm not a proponent of quick legalization on the federal level. I just see that as a very complex issue and taking a long time. I am hopeful that the federal government can at least remove some of these roadblocks. And the inability to use credit cards is actually not a law. It's that there's no cover provided to Visa, MasterCard, Discover, Amex, or Diners Club, whomever. And so they're conservative. They have too much to lose. But if the federal government were to give them cover, then we would see credit cards being able to use. And I got to tell you, what a difference that would make.
Oh, for sure.
That the illicit market can't do. They can't take credit cards.
We were fortunate enough to talk with Safira from the Liaison Group. I don't know if you've ever met her or talked with her. She's very, very big in U.S. regulation, lobbying. Has Washington, D.C.'s, the Liaison Group.
No, what's her name? I didn't catch her.
Safira Galoob, if I'm pronouncing it right. Oh, yeah. You should really, really connect with her.
Yeah.
So her company is Washington, D.C.'s only strictly cannabis lobbying group. And when we were discussing, we were talking about banking versus legalization, which is like banking all the way. Like, that's the language, and it's actually further ahead, and the language is already written for people to understand, and it makes it, and it will make it so much easier. The impact on banking actually outreaches and outpaces the legalization aspect.
I agree. I mean, there's certain issues that need to be addressed, and some of them are easier than others. This banking one is simple, and I can't even figure out why it hasn't happened. I think another one that's simple and that should happen immediately is research in all these Veterans Administration related issues. There's some legislation, they talk about it, they pass in the subcommittee, and it just dies. These two are totally based, in my opinion, you could justify them 100% as public health issues, because, you know, we get it on the research and on the VA issues, but on the banking issue, it's a safety issue. So these two should pass. Now, the harder one is this prohibitive taxation called 280E. And I don't have a happy prognosis on that one, because the federal government is in a tough spot. They like revenue, and they'd have to give it up if they did away with that. And, you know, I think a lot of Republican senators and congressmen, but mainly the senators, if you were to put a tax, a federal tax, and get rid of this 280E that is because it's illegal, and instead make a legal tax, that's de facto legalization. And I don't think the Republicans are ready for that. But anyway, we're getting off topic. I do want
to. Everything's on topic here.
Yeah, well,
everything's on topic.
I say is I think that is in the distant future. These other things, hopefully, in the more in the near term. But I think and this is an investor audience most likely listening to this, and I think one of the biggest mistakes investors in U.S. Cannabis make is to think that they're betting on federal legalization. I think there could be, that's very far from the truth. And in fact, it's counterintuitive, but you don't want it, trust me, because you don't want to be competing with Procter & Gamble or Kraft or whatever it is, Colgate. So the real issue that I see right now is, it's very easy to see what's going on in our society. Massive unemployment, tax, budgets being blown out of the ground. Tax revenue is going to be going down. So all that is horrible. And cannabis will solve some of this because it'll make people feel better. But getting beyond that, and I'm not kidding, people are having problems sleeping and things like that. So there's probably never in our life been a better time for people to consider cannabis for health and wellness. But there's another issue that I was getting to, which is, cannabis won't cure the budget deficit, or not everybody can work in the cannabis industry, but state governments are more likely to legalize right now. And this is one of the biggest disappointments about the pandemic to me, besides the loss of life and loss of jobs. For our industry, it's the biggest disappointment that I was expecting to see more of these state legalizations later this year. Illinois it was the best ever legalization, best ever. And I thought it was going to inspire more states to move in that direction through the legislative process, which is quicker and more effective and less uncertain than through the ballot box. And we were, in my opinion, but the pandemic hit, and you have a lot of Senate legislatures that aren't in session, or they're also distracted with these other details. But long-term investors should wake up to what's going to happen. And that is, while it was deferred, it's now more likely to happen. We will see more states legalize due to these budget deficits, due to
Do you think it's just going to be streamlined? Do you think it's...
I think so.
Or would the argument be made, like you said, for jobs, for all of those things?
So take a state like Pennsylvania. Charlie at Cresco said yesterday, he called the Pennsylvania medical cannabis rollout the best ever. And I agree with him. It's been a state, they came with flower first. A lot of states don't allow all the form factors, and it's very limited. Pennsylvania did a good job on their medical. And you may not be following, but their governor and their lieutenant governor have been really pushing legalization. And I believe, I think they're Democrats. I'm not sure. Wolf. Yeah, I think he is. But many of the Republican state senators are on board, but a lot of details need to be ironed out. And I don't think anybody was expecting that to happen in the near term, but I would suggest that with what's going to happen to the Pennsylvania budget deficit and loss of job, that it's going to push that one. And you already have a great medical market, and there's plenty of public companies in there. I refer anybody that wants to know who they are. We wrote about it in New Cannabis Ventures, and you can check it out. It's a great market. There's some of your CSE listed companies are in it already, and for many of them, they actually call it one of their top markets. And I think that one is likely to go legal in the whole Northeast. It's so interesting. So New Jersey's, I was
just going to go. Let's talk New York, Jersey,
Pennsylvania,
Massachusetts. Go ahead.
We thought Massachusetts might be the catalyst to get everybody going, and it was, but let's face it, Massachusetts was a terrible rollout, horrible. And the main problem in Massachusetts has been the backyard issue and the difficulty of getting local licensing. So it's been so slow. And so you don't really have, as a matter of fact, you don't even have a legalization now. They rescinded it due to the pandemic for temporarily. So Massachusetts wasn't the catalyst immediately, but I think, and that was through the voters. And I don't think that their state government was really behind it that much. But you've had the New Jersey legislature and certainly the governor of New Jersey, Murphy, he's really on board. And the reason it failed, from what I understood, was actually not the reason you'd expect. It was because they got hung up on social equity. And I'm not criticizing that. It's an important issue. But I think that was really it. And they wanted to do it fairly, and they ran out of time. So, you know, it's important to the legislatures at the state level and to the federal government to address the wrongs towards African Americans and Hispanics from cannabis being illegal, from prohibition for all these years. And it's a great cause. I'm for the cause, but that's where it stops, because nobody can really come up with a perfect solution. There isn't one. I mean, there's other issues, where we're still struggling with that. So cannabis won't be easy to address all those wrongs. And we don't have to discuss that. But the point being, I think that was the issue. And so what happened recently with Massachusetts, apparently they didn't want people from New York coming there during the pandemic because New York's, obviously COVID hotspot. And so that's why they cut off the legal. So that really tells you what's going on. There were reports of people going from Wisconsin and other states into Illinois after it legalized. So this is what happens. And so, when you see this happening, and it hasn't happened so much in Massachusetts because they don't have that many stores, but once you see, and the voters in New Jersey will be voting in the fall, but they're still going to have to struggle through the legislature to get that done. But I think Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, within 4 years, they'll all have lots of legal dispensaries, and it'll be so flawless compared to Massachusetts.
You just touched on a point that I remembered. So you're in Texas.
Yep.
Now, New Mexico has their own thing going on, if I understand it correctly.
What's their own thing?
I believe they announced that if you are in a state that doesn't have a medical cannabis program, you are able to qualify to receive cannabis in the state of New Mexico.
I'm not aware of that, and it must be with doctor's authorization.
You can see a doctor's
authorization,
right? But you can see a doctor in New Mexico.
That's interesting.
So you'll see a lot of doctors' offices beside clinics, beside dispensaries, and there's a lot right across from the border at El Paso.
Interesting.
So,
well, I actually spent.
This was pre-COVID. So
right. New Mexico's funny. So I drive not every summer, but most summers. My wife and I drive. We go visit her mother-in-law in Santa Fe, and then we drive up to Colorado where we stay for a while. And it's kind of interesting. I've been doing this for a few years, and so New Mexico does have a medical program, but not everybody wants to be part of it, or maybe they can't qualify, for all I know. When you cross from New Mexico into Colorado, it's a town called Raton, which is totally, it's beautiful, but there's nothing to it. But there's so many cannabis dispensaries, and people from Texas go there, and New Mexico. It's all right there. Texas and New Mexico kind of touch this part of Colorado. No, it's not Raton. That's New Mexico. It's just north of there. Anyway, Raton is actually New Mexico, but just north of there, you start to see all these dispensaries. So, Texas is that's going to be one of the last states. But I'll say this: it'll be one of the best states. They'll be able to learn from.
Now, are you just saying that because you're there?
Yeah.
Are you saying that?
No,
are you biased?
No, it'll be. First of all, Texas has a lot of entrepreneurial spirit, and it's very pro-business, and I think it'll be a great state because of that. But I was saying it because so many mistakes have been made, and they force vertical integration, and all sorts of mistakes have been made, not allowing enough form factors, too much tax, whatever the issues are. It's natural. When you do new things, you make mistakes. And so Texas will be slow, unfortunately, but they'll benefit from being able to watch, the mistakes and the successes. That's all I would say.
You mentioned vertical integration. So when this whole thing started, that was one of the key hotbed phrases, vertical integration. We are vertically integrated, seed to sale, all of that. This year, and even in the last couple months, I've been speaking with companies that are doing the opposite chant, saying we are not vertically integrated. We can't be the best in every single area. So why would we want to be involved in that area?
Yeah.
We want to outsource. We want a third party. We want to partner up. We want to do those things. And it's funny just observing that shift of, that's all you were here, VI, vertically integrated company. And it's like, yeah, we want in. They control every part of it. Well, you can still control it by having a partner or outsourcing. And that's what I'm hearing so much more right now. And I don't know if you're hearing the same thing.
Oh yeah, of course, and it's exactly correct. I mean, why would an investor expect their company to be great at everything? And if you do, point me to some other industries where they're free to have horizontal, and yet they stay vertically integrated. So no, that's not the way it should be. It's easier for states like Florida to monitor and regulate when it's vertically integrated, but that's not the smart way to do it over time. And even Colorado, the first state to go legal from an adult use perspective, and one of the early states from a medical perspective, I think 2009, if I'm not mistaken, when they moved to have legalization, and I might be getting confused with when they did medical versus when they did adult use. But in any event, they had these shotgun marriages where they used to have retailers, dispensaries, and producers, and they made them partner up. And of course, now they have wholesale market there. But every other market, every other industry in the world that I'm aware of has wholesale and services provided and all that. And so we've seen it to some extent. We've seen in Canada, we've seen retailers emerge. They don't grow it or anything. And we've seen extraction LPs develop. So we've definitely started to see that. In the United States, Flower One has that model of basically doing everything up until owning the retail store. And they have their brand partners and they fulfill, they grow it for them and process it and package it and ship it to the stores, and they handle a lot of that as well. So there is that. I'm not seeing too many other examples quite yet, but I would expect over time that we'll see more and more examples of that. I keep going back to Cresco because they just had that call yesterday, and they've been making this point for a while, but they really drove it home yesterday. They say they focus on the middle part of the value chain.
Yes.
And they explain they have retail stores, but that's mainly for states where either you have to be vertically integrated or there isn't enough distribution in the state yet. So they want to have stores to get the audience going. And they also explained that, it's good to have a store because it helps you collect data that in a new market and to learn what patients, customers like. And so nobody that I know of really goes out and I'm sorry. So that's on one end, retail, on the other end is cultivation. And very few companies will say, oh yeah, we are the best growers, except in Canada. They seem to say that all the time. It's all in their motto. We grow it the best or whatever. But, and of course, every cultivator grows the best. We know that, but I do see that as a commodity. Everybody understands not only is cannabis cultivation ultimately a commodity, there is high-end flower that's not a commodity, and that will always be the case. So I'm not trying to say all cannabis is a commodity, but you and I have probably talked about biosynthesis before, and the ability to create THC and other cannabinoids through this easier process where it's more standardized. That's probably going to blow away a lot of cannabis cultivation down the road. So really, where back to Cresco, what they were saying is they're focused on brands and distribution, and so. I wish we'd see more of that.
Speaking of playing out, where are we going? Where are we going with this COVID 2020, 2021 US federal election? What do you see, and how do you see the industry transforming, staying the same, regressing, evolving, adapting to what we started out with, the new temporary reality.
Yeah. Well, so let me first say, I don't see how we're going to return to life as normal for quite some time until there's
I agree 100%.
until there's like ready testing where everybody can go to the store and have a test all the time and never have to worry that they have it or don't have it, or you have a cure or you have a vaccine. So, you know, I don't even know when the next cannabis conference will be. I'm kind of a virtual fan anyway. So
this is it. Well,
this may
is
be
our
it
conference.
For a while.
Barrington and Allen Cannabis Conference. We're doing it.
So I think that's an important thing to remember. You know, for investors out there, I always say the balance sheet's important, cash flow is important. And I've been saying recently, it's never been more important. This is an extinction event for a lot of companies, sadly. And you don't want to be stuck in those companies that don't have a path out. At the same time, some companies are going to emerge very strong. And you know, these big four have access to capital. I said earlier, it's not risk-free. If the situation, you know, everybody likes to talk about how demand is up, but so are their costs. And so it's going to take a while for these companies to adapt to the new cost structure of having to do delivery and how they're going to actually reach their customers. We may see revenue shortfalls because of COVID-19. Sure, the demand is up, and sure, the basket size is bigger, whatever it is. But the reality is it's harder to do business in the short term. That's a short-term problem. It will be solved. I think these big companies are going to be in a position to buy cheap assets, to enjoy less competition, what have you. So investors should be looking not necessarily to buy all those stocks today, but the stronger ones are going to probably survive. But a lot of them will go by the wayside. I think one of the biggest wild cards, you alluded to it, is what happens in the federal election. I've been pretty adamant for many years that we won't legalize within 5 years. It's a rolling 5 years. I said that 7 years ago. I say it all the time. It'll be 5 years.
5 years.
So I still think that's it. But if you said, but Alan, what if the Democrats get the Senate, which is a possibility now? I mean, I say that mainly because things are just, you know, very difficult to forecast. And I'm not predicting that the Democrats will win the Senate, but if you had that, I think it's really good for the cannabis space, not because of legalization necessarily, because I would argue that's complex, but I think we'll get some of these reforms that would enable research, that would enable banking and credit cards to be accepted. And it will set in motion federal legalization, which like I said, I think that's a long ways off. Unfortunately, it's very complex here in the United States. You have a whole bunch of states that kind of like it to be state legal and federally legal. They get all their tax revenue, so in control. So I think that is a wild card and something that people should be paying attention to. You know, while I'm super disappointed that we're not going to see most likely more state legalizations this year like I had expected, I'm extremely optimistic that 2021, as things start to calm down, that will be a higher priority than ever for the Northeast. And we mentioned specifically Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and New York. And I think there's some other states that have talked about, they're not as big, but Rhode Island is another state that's talked about before. I think Maryland could go in there. Maine is, you know, another small state. It is, I think, technically legal there. They just don't have a commercial program.
Right.
You can even see Minnesota, Wisconsin, and perhaps even Ohio move in that direction. Michigan already has.
I'm talking to a group that is representing a few vested interest companies in the southern United States, and basically it's the southern belt of Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee, just a very, very southern mentality and demographic for a lot of reasons. And it's cool. It's really interesting to see how they're moving, because they're taking a little bit from Florida, which is in the South, but it's not a southern state per se. And they're taking a little bit from, you know, the Southwest, and they're kind of combining what they've learned from the North. And it's I'm very, very curious to see how that's going to turn out.
Barrington, you're missing who they should be taking from. Oklahoma.
Oh God.
Oklahoma's unbelievable. Who would have thought? My neighbor to the north.
You know, you know, I have questions regarding Oklahoma and how they're doing the regulatory aspect of
Yeah.
of cannabis, and I don't want to, you know, I'm not nothing against Oklahoma. It's just
Yeah,
things that I hear.
Don't rock that boat. Let's.
No. It's just things I hear that I haven't confirmed.
Yeah.
Because, and if anybody from Oklahoma is listening, please reach out and educate me on what's going on in Oklahoma. But
Well, some of our listeners may not appreciate this, but something like 6% of that state has a medical card. They have de facto legalization, and I think
that is incredible.
It's a Republican state. It's like Texas. It's dominated by religious, religious groups. So I think for that effort I'm not familiar with, but that you alluded to, the southern states, it's very difficult to talk about cannabis for adult use. Very difficult, not likely to happen. We'll see if it happens in Florida. That'd be good. But those other states, Alabama and Mississippi, Tennessee, very difficult. But medical, that's something that everybody can kind of appreciate. And obviously in Oklahoma, having a pulse is a condition, apparently. You don't have to have a condition. You just have to have a doctor. Anybody has a doctor can get a card. And I'm not going to say whether that's good or bad. I'm for legalization, so I'm going to say it's good, actually. But I do see some downside. And there will be some regulatory pushback. They've already talked about it. But still, 6%. Look at Oklahoma, the number of patients they have in their legal system. It's a small state. And then compare it to almost any other state that has adult use. It's incredible.
No, they like I said, I've heard things regarding Oklahoma, and it's there right in front of you without being legal. So
right. You have to have a doctor.
Got to have a doctor. So listen, Alan, I don't know how much to thank you for taking the time to kick off Weed Week with the Canadian Securities Exchange on behalf of us and the investors, the listeners, the audience, market participants, people that are just curious. We all want to just say thank you, and please continue to be safe. If somebody wants to get a hold of you, or somebody wants to subscribe or read about new Cannabis Ventures or 420 Investor, where do they go?
Make it really easy. New Cannabis Ventures with an S on the end.com. And there you can find some things like signing up for our weekly letter, or if you're into, if you want it right now all the time, we also have an app, and you can find those things pretty easily. And then for 420 Investor, you can go to 420 Investor, no S on the end, just 420investor.com and learn about that as well. But thank you, Barrington. I'm a huge fan of the CSE and what you guys have done for the industry, and I look forward to watching some of these presentations this week.
Well, thank you, Alan. And don't forget to check out #finance. Go to www.thecse.com. We're on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, anywhere there's social media. Check out our podcast. We're on Spotify, iTunes, Apple Play. I'm not an Apple user, so whatever is on Apple, Buzzsprout, all of those things. So you can catch back episodes, and as well tune in, and you'll see the Instagram lives. Also check out West Coast Wednesdays. That's from our West Coast team of Anil Mall and Anna Sarin. And that's a wrap. Thank you for joining. Take care.
Stay well, Barrington.